Fictions are not falsehoods, but refashionings through which analysts experiment with different scenarios, trajectories, and reversals, elaborating new values and testing different possibilities for creating more just and equitable societies. Such fictions are not meant to convince others of what is, but to expand our own visions of what is possible. Ruha Benjamin.
When I was little, in Malaysia, my grandma told me a story about clouds. There had been a terrible drought. There was no water, no food, and the animals were dying. People began to die of starvation. The clouds, high up in the sky, looked down on the humans and pitied them. The clouds then decided to sacrifice themselves. They rained down on earth, and in so doing, they perished. The story's moral, my grandma said, is to be grateful for those who sacrifice for our well-being. Where are all the clouds now?
When I was a kid, I remember looking up at the sky with such wonder. Above the Indiana cornfields, I'd glimpse elephants or shapes from my dreams in those puffy white strands.
Novos estudos alertam que o desmatamento na Amazônia está perto de ultrapassar um limite perigoso, capaz de provocar mudanças irreversíveis na floresta.
I remember the last day that I saw clouds.
El 100% de la población está sin energía eléctrica y los municipios del sureste están incomunicados debido a que ríos se desbordaron.
These days, it takes a special kind of noticing to spot them. But back then they were everywhere.
The dams are empty, the rivers are drying up, and now there's only one way to make sure the community survives.
I remember when it started, no one really knew what was going on.
Hivi ndivyo hali ilivyokuwa katika kaunti ya Wajir. Yaliyobaki ni mimea iliyokauka pamoja na ardhi iliyotupu bila mimea yoyote.
It all happened so fast.
That new round of severe weather stretching from the Midwest to the South and the Northeast, bringing both tornadoes
No one
and
could explain
historic
why
flooding.
they were vanishing. Until it was too late.
As long as the science is being ignored, as long as the facts are not being taken into account, and as long as the situation is not being treated as a crisis, then world and business leaders can, of course, continue to ignore the situation, and that they don't have to do anything because they are not being held accountable.
Climate change is real and it's coming for us, and it doesn't matter who you are, whether you are rich or poor, this thing is real.
And we couldn't adapt fast enough.
抗旱指挥部办公室通报全省抗旱救灾工作情况。安徽遭遇了40年来最严重的干旱，各地正在全力以赴打好抗旱救灾攻坚战。
So we had to change the way we think about them, about the way we think of ourselves.
Lesbos has Europe's largest refugee camp, and Greek authorities are determined to stop a second wave of migrants from entering.
Because if we don't take their capacities seriously, if we don't see them for what they really are, what they mean, we'll never get them back. And now, everyone, everywhere, is asking the same question. How?
Sem nuvens.
Comment est-ce que c'est possible de penser d'une monde sans nuages?
Going to live in a world without clouds.
Okay, so our current plan is to try and speak with clouds so that we can understand the data we have. Is that right? Are we all on the same page? So we already know what kinds, where they're found, what they look like, what they sound like, but not what they mean. So the hope is that our ontology machine will allow the clouds to tell us how to save them. Are we on the same page? We've now had several in-depth discussions over the past several days, so we should really try and finalize this soon.
Well, back in the 2020s, the International Panel on Climate Change was saying that 2050 was the year that would be the tipping point, right? And so here we are, 2050, and the clouds are going extinct. Welcome. So, this is my lair. This is the laboratory where we've been running simulations, testing the ontology machine, trying all different kinds of models to see what's the best way to communicate with clouds. And in just a couple of days after this meeting, after this conference, we'll actually get a chance to make contact. It's pretty exciting. So, what is nephology? To answer your question from before, nephology is the scientific study of clouds. We want to know everything we can about them, how they work. So, back in the 2000s, people used to refer to all this data storage infrastructure as the cloud, right? It's pretty ironic. I mean, we thought of it as this infinite resource. You could just upload it up into the sky. It's never going to run out. And now clouds are gone. And in light of decarbonization, we now have smaller facilities like this. You know, we're not networked into a cloud anymore because there's no clouds. And so this ontology machine will produce signs. And through a kind of sociolinguistic analysis, we have hopefully devised a way to communicate and send a signal back to the clouds. We need to ask them, what can we humans do to save you?
Right, and the point being that this is going to be a cloud-led initiative. We're going to let the clouds determine the best course of action.
Exactly.
But can you explain sort of how do we interpret what the clouds say? Clouds can communicate in some ways, but they also seem quite fickle. You know, they morph, they disappear, they're always changing from one moment to the next. How do we even know what they mean? Like if we can hear them or if we can somehow sense or understand them?
Yeah, but we should still try. I mean, I understand your concerns, Linnea, but I think that's exactly why we want to listen to the clouds, right? So Brazil's on board, we'll hear from them soon. Indonesia's on board, so is Rwanda, and there's no more time. So using this technology, the ontology machine, we want the clouds to tell us how we can help save them from extinction. And you know, nothing else has worked. We've tried everything. Cloud seeding, carbon taxes, indigenous-led governments, the clouds are still dying.
I still wonder though, sort of who is to say that what the clouds need here would be the same as what clouds need elsewhere? What's the scale of all of this anyway? Are we clear on the parameters of this machine?
Yeah, I wonder what the meteorological community is going to say about this ontology machine. Some of my colleagues and friends are a little skeptical about what we're doing here. We're in the wheelhouse, so to speak. And I mean, of course, I know what we're doing here is different. You don't have to convince me of that. I get it. Numbers just can't capture everything. But I don't know how to explain what this more is that I think we're doing here.
Right, okay. So I was trained as a meteorologist, and I was actually trained at a university on the West Coast, and they had a pretty good contingent of sea ice scientists there, which is pretty neat. So sea ice sits actually at the interface between the atmosphere and the ocean, and that's what I thought was so interesting. I wanted to understand how sea ice mediates exchanges between the atmosphere and ocean. But sea ice disappeared. Okay, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. Actually, there's still pockets of sea ice in the Canadian archipelago, but perennial sea ice, the stuff that doesn't go away, stays there season after season, it's more or less gone. So when the clouds started to go, I could see a lot of parallels between what was happening to the ice, or what happened to the ice, and what's happening today.
Yeah, that's right. So we spent several years searching for clouds, and so we have lots of recordings of their sounds, and if we know what they say, we can use that information to decipher all of the recordings that we have. And the hope is that this will be a two-way communication device. So we send a message to the clouds, and the clouds will respond.
So, how does the ontology machine work? Well, what we've been able to do through a form of machine learning is to kind of look at and transduce larger signals from different kinds of data that the clouds emit, that being the kind of morphology of cloud forms, the acoustic emissions of clouds, and the optical profiles as run through spectrometers. And what we're trying to do is to kind of look at the ways that these things cohere and produce units of meaning that we're calling nephosemes. Now, so with this ontology machine, theoretically, the goal is to be able to produce these nephosemes and to be able to send a signal back to the clouds.
Right. So in this meeting today, we've established that we can proceed with the ontology machine. I think right now we want to go to some of our partners in the Global South. We're waiting to hear a report from, I think, our nephologist friends in Brazil to see how they're doing with their ontology machine. So I'm not sure, Marina, can you hear us?
Hi, can you hear us?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. I'm super curious to hear how your ontology machine is going. Have you managed to make it work already? Because we are struggling over here. I wonder if our machines will listen to the same things. Will clouds kind of speak differently depending on where they are in the world? Will they make different sounds or communicate in different ways?
But anyway, I'm calling because, as you know, we recently had a meeting of Latin American nephologists, nephologistas. And there was actually some disagreement about these efforts of ours to create this machine. So the section of indigenous nephologists reminded us that many indigenous groups could already communicate with clouds, and non-indigenous people would just not listen to what they had to say.
So for example, during the meeting, one of the scientists from the Yanomami Nation told us that their shamans had been warning us that the sky might one day come crashing down on us. After all, the sky was only maintained in place because shamans held it up. Whenever the sky would start to crash, start to shake and threaten to crack, these shamans would send their shabiri, their spirits, to reinforce it.
So in the meeting, some of these scientists underlined that perhaps if land rights had been respected, if the advances of deforestation and mining had been stopped, perhaps the shamans could have continued their work. If we perhaps had taken the Bolsonaros out of power, had stopped this hereditary dictatorship we now live in, perhaps there would still be clouds. And by the end of the meeting, we actually didn't reach a conclusion. To be honest, personally, I left the meeting with a heavy question. Even if we manage to make this machine, if we can communicate with clouds, would people even listen to what they have to say?
I agree with Marina. I think that the challenge here will be knowing what to do with the information that we get. And even if we understand clouds or what they have to say, if there's no political will to act on that, the clouds will still die.
Hi everyone, I'm Professor Robbins, and I think that I can bring a different type of angle to these questions about anthro-nepho communication. I've spent my career working on human-environment relations and agriculture in Madagascar, and my Malagasy friends have taught me to think about entities in our environment differently. My friend Haja once told me about this distinction between real lightning and artificial lightning. Real lightning strikes randomly, it comes unbidden from the sky. Artificial lightning is sent nefariously, that strikes on purpose and it kills, someone who has not been humble or somehow done wrong in the community. Real lightning and artificial lightning, even though they may look the same, are not alike and can never be alike. They're used for very different reasons. And this makes me wonder, why do we think that our clouds, our artificial clouds, you could say, from our ontology machine, could communicate with the clouds up there that we're looking for? And working with farmers in Madagascar also made it clear that we have gotten here not solely out of a failure to act, but also out of a failure to listen.
Okay, maybe this is kind of like how climate models could be better refined. At the beginning of the century, models were fairly crude and they couldn't capture clouds. They were one of the largest sources of uncertainty in models, and it's just because they weren't granular enough. Clouds are just so small. They're just several kilometers across and they last for minutes to hours. So in a model, it was like trying to catch a grain of sand with a slotted spoon. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to use models to predict the future, but these models produced wildly different predictions. They, some of them predicted 2 degrees of warming and others predicted up to 5. And the difference was how they saw clouds. But the models, they just didn't see clouds. And so, so this is, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, maybe if I'm misunderstood, but cloud watching maybe isn't just for scientists, but also for governments and decision makers. It's something that they can also pay attention to.
Sure, yeah, this gets to what I'm trying to say. With this machine, I think is, like Marina brought up, we're trying to sort of see and listen to clouds differently. And how we do that is fundamentally political.
So, what I think we're doing isn't too radical. We don't have our heads in the clouds. If you think about a famous ethnographer, Franz Boas, whose heyday was about a century and a half ago, he was doing exactly what we're doing. He was trying to save Native American cultures that were dying.
Right, and knowing what the clouds are trying to say and what they mean can help us save them from extinction.
Or else we're looking at a kind of calamity. I mean, how are we going to live in a world without clouds?
Rolling. We're in a parking lot right now, and today we're just about to get on a road trip to look for clouds. Yeah. And they're disappearing, so we're gonna go find them.
All right, I'll take the next shift. My heart almost stopped. Someone should call that right now, actually.
No, I don't know. I don't see any clouds anywhere. Condensation signs. No clouds.
What about that up there? Looks like almost like a cirrus band.
No, it's a jet stream. See? You can see the plane going up. It's not a cloud.
I guess I'm pretty desperate.
Wow, I'm glad we stopped in for a cup of coffee. I don't know. We've traveled to 5 states now.
6.
6, and still no clouds. I mean, we saw some stratus at one point, but it was a little thin, yeah.
So how I see this trip isn't so different from a long history of poets, philosophers, scientists, what have you, religious leaders, looking at clouds and trying to understand what they mean or getting meanings for them, as whether it's divine or scientific or nature. People look at clouds and they see shapes, they see animals, like this very famous 5th century poet who was writing in Sanskrit at the time. He saw clouds and he said, oh, they look like elephants. The poem was called Meghaduta, which means the cloud messenger. It tells the story of a yaksha, a divine attendant for the god of wealth, Kubera. The yaksha had been exiled from his home and from his young bride for angering the Kubera. As the rainy season nears, Yaksha asks a passing storm cloud to send a message to his beloved. The poem describes what the cloud sees and encounters en route to the beloved, and the message that Yaksha sends to her.
Like the cloud, this poem also traveled far and wide and influenced Percy Bysshe Shelley's own poem titled The Cloud. Lines from the cloud can be divided into the different species of clouds we know today.
I bring fresh showers for the thirsting flowers.
That's cumulus.
From the seas and the streams, I bear light shade for the leaves when laid in their noonday dreams.
And that's stratus.
From my wings are shaken the dews that waken the sweet birds to everyone.
And nimbus.
And he ends the poem thus: I am the daughter of earth and water, and the nursling of the sky. I pass through the pores of the ocean and shores. I change, but I cannot die.
For after the rain, when with never a stain, the pavilion of heaven is bare, and the winds and sunbeams with their convex gleams build up the blue dome of air. I silently laugh at my own cenotaph, and out of the caverns of rain, like a child from the womb, like a ghost from the tomb, I arise and unbuild it again. Interestingly, these poetic descriptions are not far away from scientific ones. A young Quaker meteorologist in England, Luke Howard, had given the problem some thought and developed a naming system that became a sensation in the scientific and artistic communities. Finding names for the clouds had eluded scientists and natural philosophers for a while. Clouds are just so changeable and ephemeral. They couldn't be pinned down into fixed forms. There were as many names as there were individual clouds.
Before Howard, were there other naming systems for clouds?
Definitely. There were systems that classified the skies as clear, checkered, hairy, thick, and waved.
I like those names, hairy. So what was different about Howard's system?
Howard standardized clouds into 3 main families: cumulus, stratus, and cirrus, which translate as heaps, layers, and tendrils in Latin. There were also 4 other cloud types, which were basically compound forms or modifications of the clouds. Actually, it was just that, Howard's emphasis on modifications of the clouds, which gave his naming system both specificity and flexibility. Howard's nomenclature inspired a number of people in both the sciences and arts. Shelley was one of them. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe was another. Goethe was a keen admirer of Howard. He felt that Howard's classification system resonated with his own understanding of the world and study of morphology, or the science of forms, which emphasized the connectedness of all natural patterns and formations.
It sounds like clouds, of all things, brought the arts and the sciences together.
Yeah, you're right.
It's really not so different from what we're doing today, trying to get past our disciplinary differences. If you think about it, humans have been looking for animacy in clouds for a very long time, whether it's the Latin names that we've used for animals and plants, and for clouds, or whether we classify clouds using names that inspire moods or notions of beauty. Like, clouds have always been alive for us. And with this machine now, isn't it just really exciting to think that they could speak back to us? And what would they say?
Look, is that our first cloud? Looks like a cumulonimbus, maybe?
No, it looks more like Nephis cumulostratus. Can you see the way the gradient and the tail cube shifts from gray to white?
Yeah. Okay, call it in. We've got cloud sign.
All right, so we're finally here. This is contact day.
Yep.
What we've been waiting for.
Yeah.
And working toward.
So many simulations.
And testing.
Prototyping.
Now,
Now
I'm pretty excited.
All right.
we're all very excited.
Begin initialization.
Okay, I'm performing the initial calibration.
Okay, I'll start recording the behavioral data.
Okay. All right.
All right.
All this time, we were trying to communicate. Not only read their behaviors, their intentions, the signs we realized they were emitting, but actually send a signal back if possible.
Okay.
So looks like the data stream's coming in. 6, sending a signal out in 5, 4, 3, 2, on the ready, 1. All right.
We were so obsessed with reaching them, with establishing contact, with knowing that they were sane, that we were scarcely prepared for what they might actually say.
All right, we're getting a signal coming out.
How's it looking?
Okay. We've
What's
got
the
output.
interval analysis so far?
Got it. Output and that can't be right.
It seems to be okay.
Are you sure you calibrated it correctly?
This can't be right.
Then nothing?
Oh no.
All of this effort, only to realize that the clouds were resisting us all along. Our attempts to intervene, our attempts to repopulate, our attempts to know their intentions.
Let's try again.
There's more to them and less to them than we ever thought. How do we live in a world without clouds?
And this is what it is. SV, urban, organic, mic mechanic, superhuman MC powers help me fly around the planet. Touch the microphone device, whole countries get frantic. Saving damsels in distress so young girls don't panic. Putting MCs under pressure till they crack like ceramic. Always thought they could flow, but sank like the Titanic. Rhymes rip through your skull like icebergs through the hull. Survive the impact and Arctic cold freezes your soul. Create a new style, then break the mold. Compositions are controlled.